Hi there, folks. This is Lee Van Laer, and today I've got Elan Feb in the studio once again for a conversation about the Fifth Obligatory. And joining us today is my wife, Neil Harris, a movements teacher who will probably be kibitzing here and there on the flow of conversation as we move forward. But now that you know everything, I think it's time for Elan to give us a little bit of his insight on the Fifth Obligatory, the music, and its background.
Okay, well, this is interesting. It seems to me that this is an opportunity here because my approach to what we've been doing with the movements so far with you, Lee, has been from the perspective of the music, and now we have a possibility of looking at the movements from the perspective of the teacher also, which could be very interesting. Um, I want to begin, however, by talking a little bit about the centers, because what I'm going to be talking about for the Fifth Obligatory, it's crucial to have this information. Some of it you may have heard before, but maybe you didn't see those videos, and I just want to put it out there. Okay, so there is a stated assumption that I've heard many times from various people who are connected with Gurdjieff's teaching, and that is that the movements are for the moving center, the the music is for the feeling center, and the writings are for the thinking center, for the intellectual center. And I've always had problems with that way of looking at things, because supposedly we are, and I think I've verified this by now for myself, we are three-brain beings. So everything we do is connected, has got to have all three of those functions involved. And when I've thought about it, when I think about music, for example, well, so this also relates to what Maurice Nicoll talks about in terms of the parts of the centers. So there's the intellectual part of the moving center, the emotional part of the moving center, etc. You can take with all the different centers. So looking at music, and these are generalizations which are by no means absolute, because things bleed into each other. But in music, we have the melody, which we follow with our mind, with our thinking. We have the harmony, which affects the feelings, and we have the rhythm, which affects the moving center. As I said, it's not black and white there, but those are the three functions there. And looking at the movements, you could see that there's the intellectual part to know the pattern, and then there's the moving part that obviously you're doing the dancing, and then the feeling part, the resultant of that work that you're doing, of hearing the music and all the things that are going on in the class, the feelings are awakened. So it's not a one-centered activity, obviously. And the only thing that stumped me when I was thinking about the reading, his writings, and what in Gurdjieff's, in reading Beelzebub, where would the moving center be? And it occurred to me that this is connected with, when I am reading, I am sensing my body. I have the opportunity to be aware of myself, okay, physically. Emotionally, the words that I read, they touch me. So let's translate that into the Fifth Obligatory. Did you want to say something first about that?
Well, I think what you're citing there is doctrine. I will interject on one point, and that is that I recall many years ago when we were in New York City taking movements from Andre Eynard, who was, one of the more important movements teachers back in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. Andre specifically said at one point in a class, the movements are for the mind, so even the movements teachers have varying perspectives on just what the movements serve, but I think that the idea that they serve all three centers is pretty spot on, in my opinion. Neil, what do you think?
I don't keep going.
Okay. So now I want to turn to the fifth obligatory, and the reason I put this in there because when we're looking at the fifth obligatory, the movement, all of these three functions are there all the time, but at the same time, certain functions are emphasized in this movement more, they're brought to the fore. Okay, so and remember when I began speaking about this several talks ago, that to my mind the fifth obligatory is a mini ritual movement. This first gesture shows of the arm forward with the palm facing to the left, the fingers pointing forward, shows my intention in life, my path. The turning the hand down says I'm now going to get to work. It's the palms pointing towards the earth. And then the movement begins, and I am doing this work. And I'm doing this work with my body, making these gestures which refer to the different kinds of note values, the quarter note, which I've gone through many times before, not necessary to speak about them right now. And at the same time, my mental attention, my intellectual attention is occupied with this pattern and well, I'll just leave it at that. It's occupied with keeping the pattern. And this process goes on when Gurdjieff and Hartman, when they repeat, when the music is repeated and this pattern goes on, it's clear that this is a cycle that one is involved in. There is this process of practical work that's happening. And Lee pointed out in one of the previous talks that those three notes, that's do, re, mi, re, do. And that's in the law of the octave, there needs to be a shock to move it forward. And that occurs when we get to these vibrations. And now all of a sudden we're down on the floor and we come into ourselves and we have this next section which I now want to speak about. So here for the first time, Hartman writes in the music più mosso. And più mosso means more movement, which translates to musicians to mean quicker. So he's not just quickening the note values, but he's quickening the tempo. That's what più mosso means. So as opposed to, now I have to get excuse me, I'm going to have to move my mic. So if the pulse is one, ta, 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 andante, as Hartman writes at the top of the page, if I were to continue at that speed here, that's what that would sound like. But he says più mosso, quicker. So now we have now, he doesn't say how much quicker, so that is open to the interpretation of the movements teacher, how fast the movements teacher wants to go, and the pianist to put in his 3 cents also is a possibility. But the point is that it's going quicker there. And then you ask yourself, why is the tempo going quicker? And then you have to look at the gesture. So the gesture here and keep in mind, I'm not a specialist in the movement, so if I'm getting something wrong, please let me know. But this gesture here, can you see me? Yes? This gesture here, wakening the feelings. Here, opening, closing, okay? So the feelings are being awakened, and for that reason, because these are definitely movements, the obligatories were movements that Hartmann worked specifically with Gurdjieff in the composition of which, as opposed to the 39 series where there could be more wiggle room to say, well, Gurdjieff never was there, he never agreed about that. But these, Gurdjieff was present for this movement. So here we have the awakening of the feelings, the tempo quickens, and when we get to the end of that section, we have a fermata, okay? So we have here, and that note, that chord is held for an indeterminate amount of time. It's out of time from the rest of the movement. Why? Because we don't know what is going to happen next. So whatever is going to happen next is going to be on a different order. And this is where I have been trying to get to in all of these talks. And the more I think about it, the more I think, why am I wasting my time and your time listening to this great epiphany of mine? But I'm going to put it out there anyway. So here, for the first time, de Hartmann uses a trill. And remember, I've said that Hartmann almost never uses trills because trills are dissonance. They convey light energy. In this case, these seconds do. The vibration between is connected to light. I'm convinced of this, especially when I've read what Kandinsky had to say about it and what Hartmann got from Kandinsky. And he didn't need to make a trills because he's already writing in dissonance. And yet here he's using a trill. So, okay, so he's using that trill, and the question is, why is he using that trill? What is that trill expressing? So in that section of the movement, there's a number of things that are going on. The most important one is that the arm is making a circle, okay? It's making a circle in front of the body.
Huge circle.
Exactly, and I will knock over my microphone if I do that. But yeah, okay, here. But
there you go.
A huge circle, and in my experience of doing this movement, and I have to say, I was constantly being directed to the piano rather than the movements for when I did the movements. But when I did this movement, when I was at Sherborne, I remember that the focus of my attention was on the arm movement, on this circle that I was making. And it wasn't until I got into this from the point of view of watching the movement and listening to the music that I realized that de Hartmann is saying something really important here. Because that trill is a particular kind of vibration. So if we backtrack, we see that we've worked on the moving center, the thinking center, the feeling center. All the centers are now awake. And then this part of the movement comes in where we are generating something that is going outwards. Okay? So it's almost like we've gained something and now we are emanating this. And that emanation is coming from the center of the breast. And that's where the trill is telling us to put our attention. And while this is going on, we are looking at our left hand, and those of us who know something, who have dabbled in palmistry as I had, the palm of the hand is considered to have all the information about us. So I'm looking at myself in the mirror, and then I'm putting my hand out to the side to connect with my neighbor. Okay, so there's all this stuff that's happening, that I'm aware of myself, I see myself, I'm putting my connection to my neighbor, I am generating this energy, and with my feet, I'm going forward to the side and then back. And incidentally, for the foot gesture, I have a funny feeling about this trill, because the way he's written, the way you would expect a trill to work 99% of the time would be something like this. You'd have and it would go, in other words, it would go, but he doesn't do that. He puts in the, right? He has that little eighth note beat, and to my mind, he's saying that's when the leg should move. That's when the leg, he's giving an indication there that that's where that gesture should begin, which would, if that's true, make that a very, very quick and precise gesture. So, anyway, to conclude this, so this movement has not only accumulated energy in us, but it's also produced, we also share that what we have gotten from our own inner work